You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
What if your dream home wasn't empty? In He Never Left, a young nurse searching for a fresh start moves into a quiet Oregon house, hoping to escape the noise of the city and rebuild his life. But soon he begins noticing strange things he can't explain. Footsteps in the hallway when no one's there, the faint smell of cigarette smoke with no source, and glimpses of a child that shouldn't exist. The longer he stays, the worse it gets. Every night brings new, chilling signs that the house has a dark history, and that history refuses to stay buried. Is he imagining it, or is he living with something that never left at all? If you love psychological horror with a supernatural edge, stories that feel like they could happen to you, subscribe to Soul Studios. Every week, we bring you terrifying, true account-style stories that will keep you looking over your shoulder long after the video ends, because the next story might just follow you home. I jolted awake in the dead of night to the sound of floorboards creaking in the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay there in the dark, a cold sweat clinging to my skin. Was that a footstep or just the old house settling? The noise came again. Another long, deliberate creak. This time I knew it wasn't my imagination. Someone or something was moving in the shadows beyond my door. The air felt suddenly oppressive, and I caught a faint whiff of stale cigarette smoke wafting through the hallway. I don't smoke, and I lived alone. It was 3:14 a.m., and there shouldn't be anyone else here. Summoning what courage I had, I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, my bare feet touching the icy wooden floor. With each cautious step toward the slightly ajar bedroom door, the old planks groaned under my weight, threatening to give away my approach. I held my breath, my pulse thudding in my ears as I strained to hear any hint of movement. My mind raced through rational explanations, maybe a window left open, or perhaps I was still half dreaming. Yet every hair on my arm stood on end, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. Gently, I nudged my bedroom door open wider. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lit only by the weak yellow glow of a nightlight near the floor. The smell of cigarette smoke was stronger here, as if someone had been standing right outside my room. Squinting into the gloom, I noticed a tall silhouette at the far end of the corridor, near the doorway to the living room. I blinked hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Hello?" I whispered, barely audible. In the space of a heartbeat, the silhouette vanished, not fading or walking away, but simply gone the instant I spoke. Silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I stood there trembling, unsure if I had really seen someone, or if my sleep-starved eyes were playing tricks. A part of me wanted to believe it was nothing, but my gut twisted with fear. I forced myself forward, one unsteady step at a time down the hall to investigate. Suddenly, a loud thud erupted from the kitchen, as if something heavy had fallen. I jolted, a yelp catching in my throat. That was it. I bolted back into my bedroom, heart slamming against my ribs, and shoved the door closed. With shaking hands, I turned the lock and pressed my back to the door, sliding down to the floor. In the faint sliver of light under the door, I watched for shadows, half expecting to see feet standing on the other side. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the rapid thump of my own heartbeat. I sat there for what felt like hours, every muscle tensed, clutching a kitchen knife I'd grabbed from the nightstand. I flinched at every tiny sound, the creak of the house's beams in the wind, the rustle of leaves outside. I didn't dare close my eyes. By the time the first grey light of dawn crept in through my window, I knew one thing for certain. Normal had left this place. Whatever had crept through my halls last night, it shattered my sense of safety. I was no longer convinced I was truly alone in this house. My name is Michael Rivers, and I'm a 29-year-old emergency room nurse. A few weeks ago, I relocated to a quiet town in Oregon for a fresh start and a new position at St. Mary's Hospital. I found a quaint, affordable 1940s-era house on the outskirts of town and jumped at it, eager for some peace after years of city chaos. I thought I was finally building a safe home for myself. Little did I know, this old house had a history, one that wouldn't let me live in peace. I moved after a painful breakup, hoping a change of scenery would help me heal. But starting over alone was harder than I expected. I was lonely. Most evenings after a long shift, I would eat a simple dinner for one and collapse into bed. The house's creaky charm felt cozy by day, but at night the silence was a stark reminder of my solitude. I may be an ER nurse who's seen my share of trauma, but I've always had an irrational fear of the dark. Embarrassing as it is, I still slept with a nightlight on. In an empty house, every strange noise after sundown set my nerves on edge, no matter how much I told myself there was nothing to be afraid of. During my first week, there were actually some hopeful moments. One quiet evening, with rain tapping on the roof, I felt almost content as I flipped through an old photo album. I even chuckled at myself for double-checking the front door lock before bed, chalking it up to new house jitters. Back then, I truly believed I could find peace here. My goal was to rebuild my life and prove I could stand on my own. But after that first terrifying sleepless night, my confidence crumbled. The next morning at work, I tried to laugh it off as a bad dream or just stress. Houses make noises, I told myself. You were just overtired. I clung to those rationalizations because the alternative was far more frightening. Over the next few days, unsettling events began to pile up, each one chipping away at my sanity. It started with small, strange occurrences that I tried to shrug off. One morning, my keys weren't where I swore I left them the night before. Another night, I walked through the living room and passed through an icy cold spot that raised goosebumps on my arms, even though it was warm inside. Once, as I was drifting to sleep on the couch, I heard a faint child's giggle somewhere in the house. It was so soft and fleeting, I told myself I must have imagined it. But these incidents kept happening, and with each one, my home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. One night I even heard the heavy scrape of a dining chair sliding across the floor by itself. When I cautiously checked the dining room, nothing was out of place. But the chair's wooden seat was warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. I retreated and spent the rest of that night locked in my bedroom, heart pounding in the darkness. My nerves were beginning to fray. I started jumping at the slightest sounds, even at work, and back at home I took to turning on every light and playing soft music to fill the eerie silence. For a short while, these measures made the house feel almost normal again, but nothing could ward off what came next. A few nights later, a violent storm hit. The power suddenly went out, blanketing the house in darkness as rain lashed at the windows. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and stepped cautiously into the hall. Thunder rattled the walls. I was inching toward the electrical panel in the laundry room when I heard a tiny whimper behind me, like a child about to cry. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam danced wildly across the small laundry room and then landed on a little girl standing in the corner by the washer. She looked about 5 years old, her long dark hair hanging wet over her face. Her dress was old-fashioned and dripping with water, as though she'd been caught in a downpour. For a heartbeat, I just stared, unable to breathe. The flashlight's beam illuminated her eyes. They were dark, hollow pits fixed on me with an expression of sadness. A strangled gasp escaped my throat. In the next blink, the light flickered, and she was gone. The flashlight sputtered out, leaving me in blackness. My hands were shaking so badly it took a moment to smack the flashlight back on. The corner was empty now, but the concrete floor was wet. A small puddle glistened where the girl had stood, and a trail of tiny wet footprints led out of the laundry room, then just stopped halfway down the hall, as if the child had vanished into thin air. That was the final straw. Adrenaline surging, I ran. I didn't bother grabbing anything except my car keys from the hook by the door. I fled into the raging storm, not even pausing to put on shoes. I drove through town with my hands shaking on the wheel and checked into the first motel I saw. I spent that night at a motel on the edge of town, too terrified to return. By morning, despite trying to convince myself it had all been a stress-fueled nightmare, I knew I needed answers. Desperate for answers, I scoured old newspapers at the town library. I uncovered the house's grisly history. In 1985, a man named Roger Blackwood murdered his wife inside that house, and his 5-year-old daughter Emily vanished the same night. Her body was never found. Roger then hanged himself in the hallway outside what is now my bedroom. He had been an abusive man and, tellingly, a heavy smoker. That detail explained the phantom cigarette smoke. My hands shook as I stared at a grainy old family photograph in one clipping. Roger looked stern. His wife's face was faded and little Emily stood smiling innocently. My stomach turned over. I recognized that girl instantly as the dripping wet child I'd seen. Everything now clicked into place and my blood ran cold. I wasn't just imagining a haunting. I was living with the restless dead of that house's past. I knew I couldn't stay another night in that house, but I also couldn't leave my belongings behind forever. With daylight on my side, I thought I might be safe long enough to pack my things and get out for good. I decided to return in the late afternoon, while the sun was still up, to collect whatever I could. I told myself I'd be in and out in a few minutes. After all, ghosts might haunt the night, but surely I'd be safe in the light of day, right? Dusk was giving way to night as I pulled up to the house one last time. Every instinct screamed at me not to go back in, but I had no choice. I needed my things, and more importantly, I needed to close this chapter of my life forever. I stepped inside with my empty duffel bag slung over my shoulder, nerves tingling. The house was eerily quiet, except for the distant rumble of thunder from another approaching storm. I moved quickly, tossing clothes and essentials haphazardly into the bag. My hands were shaking. Just a few more minutes, I told myself, then I'd be gone for good. As I zipped up the bag, a soft melody drifted through the air. I froze. It was the tinkling notes of a music box playing a lullaby. The sound was coming from the living room. Skin prickling, I crept toward the doorway. There, on the living room floor, was a small wooden jewelry box I'd never seen. Its lid was open, the lullaby twinkling out into the dim room. Next to it was a sodden, threadbare stuffed teddy bear. My throat tightened at the sight of that toy, water dripping from its matted fur onto the floor. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness as thunder shook the walls. The music box ground to a halt, slowing to deep, warped notes. I was plunged into darkness once more. I fumbled for my flashlight with numb fingers and clicked it on. The beam cut across the living room and revealed a figure standing by the far wall. Roger Blackwood's ghost glared at me from the shadows, tall and deathly still. I could see the rope still dangling from his neck, the end of it frayed. His head lolled at an unnatural angle, and his eyes... those eyes were filled with a seething hatred that chilled me to my core. The stench of stale tobacco flooded the room. My knees nearly buckled as a wave of sheer terror hit me. He moved faster than any living person. One moment he stood across the room. The next, he was a blur charging straight at me. I barely had time to throw myself backward with a scream. An invisible force slammed into my chest like a sledgehammer, sending me crashing against the wall. Pain exploded in my back. Before I could recover, I felt a cold hand clamp around my throat. I clawed desperately at my neck, but there was nothing to grab, only the sensation of iron fingers crushing my windpipe. My flashlight had skittered across the floor, its beam now casting crazy shadows on the ceiling as it rolled. Dark spots danced at the edges of my vision as I was lifted onto my toes by that impossible grip. Roger's face loomed inches from mine, contorted with murderous rage. I kicked out blindly, gurgling, trying to break free, but it was like kicking at air. As consciousness slipped, a thought pierced through my panic. Emily. With the last scrap of air in my lungs, I choked out, Emily! For a split second, nothing happened. His grip remained vice-like. Then all at once, the pressure vanished. I collapsed forward onto the floor, coughing and gulping in sweet air. Above me, Roger's apparition recoiled, an expression of agony or fear twisting his features. He let out an inhuman howl, a sound of pure fury and pain that reverberated through the house. Lightning strobed through the windows, and in that flash, I glimpsed a second shape near him, the small figure of a girl. Emily's ghost stood just behind Roger, her tiny hand gripping his arm. She was holding him back. His furious eyes met mine one last time, and then he and the girl both flickered out, swallowed by the darkness as the thunder rolled. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back. I grabbed the duffel bag from where it had fallen and bolted for the front door. The door blew open against the gusting wind, and I stumbled out into the rain-soaked night. Behind me, I heard one final enraged scream from inside the house. Roger's fury crashing like the thunder itself as he realized I was escaping. I leapt into my car, turned the ignition with trembling hands, and tore down the driveway. As I sped away, a flash of lightning revealed a lone silhouette standing in the front doorway. I couldn't tell if it was Roger or Emily watching me, but by the next lightning flash, the figure had vanished. I survived that harrowing night, but I'll never be the same. I refused to spend another minute in that house alone. The very next day, I convinced two of my co-workers to accompany me back in the daylight to grab the rest of my belongings. The house was eerily quiet and ordinary in the sun, as if nothing had happened. The only sign of that night's chaos was a single object lying in the hallway. That old teddy bear, now dry and dusty. Neither of my co-workers knew its significance. They just shrugged it off as a forgotten toy. I said nothing, but seeing it made my skin crawl. I also couldn't hide the dark purple bruises ringing my neck. I caught my friends exchanging uneasy glances when they saw those marks. I mumbled something about an accident. How could I possibly make them understand what really happened in that house? I terminated my lease immediately and moved into a small apartment above a busy grocery store in town. It's cramped and a bit noisy, but these days I find comfort in noise and light and the presence of people nearby. I sleep with a lamp on and a crucifix above my bed, gifts from a sympathetic local pastor who didn't ask too many questions. Each sunset still brings a ripple of anxiety I can't quite quell. In quiet moments, I can't help but think of the lives that house claimed. Roger Blackwood's evil might linger in those walls forever, but I have to believe that Emily's spirit found some peace that night. She saved my life by standing up to her father's ghost, and perhaps in doing so, she saved herself too. I'll never forget the sight of her small figure in that flash of lightning, bravely defying a monster even in death. The image of her eyes, determined and sad, is seared into my memory. I carry those memories with me, heavy as they are. I know now that the world is stranger and darker than I ever believed. But I'm telling this story as a warning and a tribute. A warning that unimaginable things can lurk where you least expect them, and a tribute to a little girl who even in death refused to be a victim. As long as I live, I'll remember what happened in that house. As long as I live, her story, our story, will be told as the truth. I may have escaped that house, but its shadow will never leave me. Every night, I wonder if the smell of smoke or the sound of a creaking floorboard will return, reminding me he's still watching. Because in that place, the dead don't rest, and neither do I. Some houses keep their secrets. This one keeps its dead.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained, and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.